I'm going to be your moderator, Tony Esselin, yet again. All right, so this is going to be the first question, and we can go down the line for everybody to participate in answering. And then after that, I might decide to ask somebody specific, so make yourself at home. So do you feel you are being adequately taught about the history of race adjustment and clinical decision-making at your institution? Why or why not? Would you like to start? Yeah.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, first of all.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate being able to have the opportunity to be here. So I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, and I can't really recall a time where our curriculum has gone into talking about the racial impact of all these modalities. So I feel like there's a lot of work that can be done, and that's part of the reason why I decided to join the Institute for Healing and Justice in Medicine.
Fantastic. Just take hers.
Sorry, yes. I think I'm going to reiterate a similar response here. I don't think institutions are actually teaching all the health inequities that racial algorithms are putting forward. But another thing is that we don't really teach the history of how the structural racism. We know that it exists, but we don't. I think I learned about Dr. Sims, the father of gynecology, is what, unfortunately we call him that, but we didn't learn that he experimented on enslaved African American women. We didn't learn that the history of eugenics. I think I learned that during my MPH. It was a small little course, but this isn't being taught in our medical schools. This isn't being taught in where we should be educated about this. I think I learned about Dr. Sims in an American Medical Student Association, like a program that we had. We have a racism in education scholars program, and that's where I learned about this. But why isn't this being taught in medical education? And it's very rooted in history, the structural racism, and that's what we see in race-based algorithms, unfortunately, that still exists. I think we have a long way to go to change the curriculum, and med students really do have a voice to make that change.
That's right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gerald. I'm a third-year MD PhD student at Mount Sinai. I'm going to answer your question no, despite the fact that in our first-year curriculum, and Christine can potentially speak to this a little bit as well, in our physiology course, we were taught by Dr. Stacey Leisman, a nephrologist at our institution, about the modification of diet and renal disease equation and how there's a race correction factor incorporated into clinical practice. And many students at our institution were kind of on the forefront of this activism work that Dr. Fair presented to remove that racial correction factor from the equation and try to pursue clinical alternatives that are not considering race in order to try to fix some of the racial inequalities that the equation perpetuated. And in our first year physiology course, we were taught specifically how this equation was introducing different racial inequities and what specific problems that was causing in clinical practice, how race-based medicine is negatively impacting our ability to provide care. And then that lecture also then provided alternatives for how we can best measure EGFR without the use of some sort of race correction factor. But obviously, as we know, there are so many different areas of medicine where there are race correction factors present. We also learned in our first year coursework about spirometry and how race correction use in that can also negatively impact black patients as well. But Dr. Fair's presentation also showed for the UTI risk score. I know in that paper that you showed, it talked about how for pediatric patients, you're 2.5 times less likely to catch a UTI in a black child compared to non-black child because of the way that the scores adjust and overestimate the health of black patients. And this is something that really is not touched in any other coursework other than our physiology course, right? And so it's something where I think these are kind of the lowest hanging fruit that physicians who are teaching every course regarding their specialty can do, is investigating specifically what equations are being used to measure key parameters like things like CHAD-VAS score in cardiology. in order to figure out, one, where the problems are, and then two, how can we address them by picking better clinical alternatives?
I also agree that no, we're not talking about it enough in medical education. I think at specifically Hofstra, we've been working, especially in the past 3 years, since 2020, to integrate more curricular sessions throughout all 4 years of our medical school curriculum. And that's, I think, the first step. It's not enough, and it's going to take a lot more time until I think we feel that it's enough. But it's been mostly a student-driven process in collaboration with our faculty, and so we've started a bunch of curricular sessions, such as the racism in OBGYN, to give historical context, because I do think, I agree that that's a big piece that's missing and kind of lays the foundation for why there is a lot of racism in medicine and in medical education. So I think it's all stepping stones at the moment, and we have to continue to build upon the framework that we're all here trying to lay.
I agree. I think it's really important that we have all of these different conversations, that this symposium is happening, that we can bring all of the medical educators together. I think for me, I was impressed that we were able to have this session during our physiology course, and it was one of the really lectures that I was like, wow, I'm really listening to this. I'm looking more into the resources that are cited, and I was excited about it because it was something I had never seen in my traditional medical education to that point. And I think to that point, medical students are excited about this stuff. They get really interested. They want to do the work, and they need to be supported. They need to have people who are willing to mentor them and who are willing to help them progress the field further. And as long as we can get that done, it's going to make this work go forward.
So we need to do better, is what I'm hearing, right? This question is for Rohini. What do you believe the role of students and trainees could be in anti-racism in medical education, since you're in the American Medical Student Association?
Oh, I think medical students have so much power. I don't think we realize that, because it's true. Medicine is a hierarchical system, and we often do feel like we're at the lowest level. But a mentor once told me that, and he's the dean of a medical school, and he said, if one medical student comes up to me, I'll take it into note. But if two come up to me, oh, that's something that I am bringing up, I'm thinking about, I'm trying to figure out how to change it. So there's power in one voice, but there's even more power in a collective voice, and that's what we can do as medical students. And there's just so many things that we can do. So as part of AMSA, we're an advocacy group. What that means is we advocate for curriculum changes. We advocate for, pushing for more DEI initiatives in schools. We push for policy changes, institutional changes. And this can't happen just at a national level of an organization. This has to happen at every institutional level. And that's what we do. We send out toolkits to different institutions. We make sure that our medical students are looking at these toolkits, bringing it forward to their institutions, using their voice. And we really want to empower students' voices. That's what it's about. Medical students really do have all the power. So do pre-medical students. Honestly, everyone has power. But we especially, I think, we're going to be future physicians. We are the future, so we can use this to make a change. I think another thing that students really can make a change on is ensuring that we call out leadership and putting together accountability and liability measures in place. We think that we may not be able to do this, but we can. And we have seen that changes, like with White Coats for Black Lives, and all the other movements that came forward. We've made changes. I've seen, I think, if you've looked at suture kits, I've only ever seen white suture kits. That's not, that doesn't make sense in real life. That's not the only population that we're treating. But now that's changing. And I think that's directly because of what students have been voicing. Sorry.
No.
So I'm just going to project. But what I will say is we do have all the voice. And if there's more information that you'd like to just figure out what we can do, please reach out to AMSA, reach out to me. I think we have toolkits for almost everything, from microaggressions to first-generation medical students, how to navigate the system.
this is what we want to be focusing on. And so, yeah.
That's great. Does anybody want to add to that? No? Okay. I'm going to call on folks then. So this question is for Maya and also for Christine. I would like for both of you to weigh in on this if you could. But what are the key barriers that you have seen in anti-racism praxis from the student perspective? Because we're all super inspired here, right? We're all like, we're going to change it today. But like, what's the reality of the barriers that you think we're all facing?
I think a big one that I've personally confronted, and I know a lot of my classmates who are here have also confronted, is just there's so much in medical education we're trying to learn, and how can we now fit more things in? And in my opinion, this needs to be at the center of what we're learning, but the way the foundation of our medical curriculums was not founded with these things directly embedded into it immediately. So now we're trying to fight against this system where we have this like huge medical curriculum and we're trying to fit more things into it. Where's the time, where's the space to fit it? And that's been, I think, a constant struggle that I've personally faced, of how to say, well, this is just as important of a curricular session as the next one that's coming after it, that's already been there for the past 10 years. And so I think finding ways to incorporate a lot of this information and this content has been really difficult. I think people are paying attention and trying their best, but that's been a huge barrier we've been meeting up against. Also, sustainability has been a hard thing for us, that we've had a lot of students that were here to build CARA, the committee that I'm here representing for my school. But now the newer medical students coming in weren't here when we were all energized and excited to build these initiatives. And so continuing sustainability, it can't be continually driven by only students. I feel like we need a lot more investment, time and energy-wise, from our institution as a whole, and it can't be just continually pushed by the students. And otherwise, this energy is going to slowly die out. So those are the two biggest things I think we're struggling with at the moment.
For me, I think some of the barriers to doing anti-racist work as a medical student, one of them is the power dynamic that you have between the leadership and the medical students at your institution. Sometimes it feels like it's like a very big, I have to send this email. Will they respond to me? How long is it going to take them to respond to me? How is this work going to be done? And what is the process? And for people who have not done this work before, first-year medical students, people who are in preclinical years, how do they get supported through doing these processes and understanding this terminology that comes along with being so intellectualized with this, like the way we speak about anti-racism, the way we talk about this curriculum? It's sometimes very foreign to medical students who've never done it before, and I think trying to promote that and reduce that barrier for some of the students is really helpful. And yeah, that's it. Gerald, you have one too.
Oh, I have plenty. Many thoughts about this.
Bring it.
So I'm on this panel representing the RBI CAP Fellowship at Mount Sinai, which stands for the Racism and Bias Initiative, and Center for Anti-Racism in Practice Fellowship, which is a compensated fellowship that pays students to participate in anti-racism activism and work at the institution throughout the year in a mentored capacity. And a part of what I do is working on different projects within medical education to try to reform the curriculum, preclinical, clinical, in order to make it better representative of what we need to do to best take care of patients of color. And something that I've noticed in terms of the problems, like you both just mentioned, two of the biggest that I feel, especially with the dynamic between leadership and the students doing the work, is distance, intentional distance between the student and the leadership on any of the projects that I'm working on, and as well as power hoarding. And I think it's something that's relatively unintentional. There's no one necessarily mustache twirling, I'm not going to let you do the work that you're hoping to do. But what I found is that the decision-making capacities, no matter how much work I'm doing boots on the ground, I do things like auditing the curriculum to try to figure out whether or not we're meeting certain anti-racist praxis objectives within the preclinical curriculum. And when I see this is one way that we're clearly failing, or this is one way that we're not assessing students effectively, I can write a report, I can yell as loud as I want to, but it's something where unless I'm given the capacity to actually introduce those changes, can I design the PowerPoint slides? Can I do the active work which usually I'm not given that capacity. I'm kind of kept at an arm's length for a lot of the different work that I do. And so I think that that's something that I wish leadership knew, was that giving us more power, just in the sense of being able to introduce changes that don't need to go through bureaucracy where we aren't allowed to be in the room, can make an enormous difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You want to add?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, of course. This is your time.
I exactly what all my colleagues here are saying. I just want to add one more thing. There's a lot of resistance to change. I think I've been seeing that in institutions. I think it comes from a lack of understanding why this is so important, why we need to talk about health equity, and there's also a resistance to kind of challenging the status quo, and a discomfort, I think, in calling out. In calling out these systems that have been in place for so very long. And I think this is where students can come in. This is where you can say, hey, this has been happening for so long, but we need to change this. And I think it's very true. There's inadequate curriculum, and they're afraid to make those changes, adding in a few extra slides, saying that it's going to take up a lot more time. But this is important. This is what we see in real clinics, in hospitals, and I don't think we do enough in that area. And there's also a lot of implicit bias and a lack of awareness in institutions. They're using DEI, anti-racism, as almost as keywords, but they're not really doing the work behind it. And again, I think this is where students can come in, call these systems out. And I agree. I think students, if they're given more power to make these changes, I think we would want to do that. I think all of us are ready to do that.
And just to kind of jump back in, something that I've thought a lot about in trying to work on making specific changes to the curriculum. If any of you have worked in medical education, it's something where you see a lot of that work is retrospective. We look at surveys, we look at feedback from students about how the course went in order to try to change it for next year, and not necessarily looking ahead to see what the next generation of students who are going to be taking this course want to see represented. And that's something that I feel, when thinking about whose responsibility it is to make those anti-racist changes, it's hard for me to say it needs to be the students, but at the same time, I think the way that medical education is taught, it's very much what was taught 10 years ago. How can we make sure that students are getting the basic concrete information about pathophysiology that they need to best take care of patients, which is something that's time tested. Mm-hmm. But we live in a world right now where things are changing very tumultuously, very quickly. And that's not something that I think medical education is very much prepared to incorporate into the learning. And so learning needs to, the curriculum needs to be changed in real time while people are taking the course, and not necessarily in retrospect, because by the time you change something, things are different the following year.
Yeah.
And so I think the paradigm with which we approach curricular redesign needs to incorporate students more regularly and get direct feedback from the people taking the course, not just people who have taken it.
So just to jump on that, so one commitment we can think about, because as we're going through our day, we're trying to make commitments at the end of this, but something for us to think about is to make sure that in all of our institutions, there are students on those curricular committees, period, right? That could be something that we can think about and push for in terms of a recommendation. Go ahead, Monique.
One other thing that I want to add is the minority tax and just feeling burnout. I remember there was one time during my second year, we have a doctoring class, so it's our class is pretty much broken into small groups of maybe 10 students or so, and it's led by a physician, a fourth-year student, and then some other professional who also joins in, maybe a social worker or someone like that, a nurse practitioner, for example. There was one day where we're supposed to go over why different patients have different health disparities. And the physician in the class decided to say, well, I feel like we talk about this a lot. Let's take a vote. We can either talk about this or we can move on to another topic. And I'm sitting there being like, I feel like we never talk about this, and this is an essential conversation. So they do the vote, actually, and the majority of the class votes to kind of move on to another topic. And I'm one of the few students who decides to talk about different health disparities. So one student raises her hand and she brings up, well, won't this be on the exam? So we need to know this information. So that's why they kind of backtracked and talked about that information. So I was the only black woman in the class. There were a couple other students of color, of South Asian descent, but the attention kind of all went to me because I kind of like stood out in that situation, and I felt like I had to represent like everybody and say like, this is important, this is very essential for patients, and doctors have a critical component to this. And the physician kind of backtracked again and said, well, I feel like this is because of health literacy and patients don't really know how to interpret the information that we're giving them. So it's just like different situations like that keep coming up. That kind of like, it feels like a weight on your shoulder to constantly have to represent and to constantly have to educate. So I feel like that's a big barrier, and it also shows that it's important to take care of yourself and to also find community with people who have similar values and similar input to you as well.
Before that, let's all take a collective eye roll at that situation there.
I just wanted to add also that often the people showing up in the spaces to learn about how to be anti-racist are the people who are already engaged in this space and want to be here and maybe already have some education on it. And I think a big focus for me is how do we reach people who don't think it applies to them or think they know enough or don't care apparently to learn about it or only want to learn about it because it's going to be on an exam. And I don't have an answer for that, but that's something that I've been confronting a lot, is how do we get people to show up in these spaces if we have optional sessions or we have feedback that we want to get from students. We're hearing from the people who want to make their voices heard and who are already carrying this burden that they feel like they need to advocate for them. They have to advocate for themselves in these spaces. And so how can we get the other students, get other leadership who don't want to engage, don't feel like it applies to them, think that they know enough to show up and to learn and open their ears and open their minds to how this is just as an important thing for them to be addressing and them to be showing up in. So I think if anyone has good suggestions, like very open to hearing that, because I think that's also something we need to be working on too, is not just introducing all of this stuff, making it addressed in our medical education, but how to get people who don't want to engage, because those are the people that we need to reach at the end of the day.
Yeah, my suggestion is we have to change the way we teach medicine, period. End of story.
Yeah. I just think it needs to be not optional and normalized.
Yeah.
Those are the two biggest pieces, and it's something where, everyone's nodding and agreeing, yes, like, of course this needs to happen, but what does that look like, right? There's a paucity of guidance in terms of how do we actually make that normal. And it's something where I think that can look like so many different things, including one slide per lecture that achieves some sort of anti-racist objective. That can look like having an entire lecture. That can look like having mandatory group discussions. And I think you encounter many students who don't want to participate in that kind of work, and then that can kind of guide discussion, especially if the proctor for that particular session also agrees, I don't really feel like I need to be participating in this or that I need to advance this type of thing because you probably hear about this all the time. We talk about this all the time, so why is it important that I do it? And it's like, there's a reason for that, but it just needs to be coming from top down and across every field, every class that we're being taught, that this is something that you should just come to expect. So even if you don't like it, even if you think, oh, sigh, here we go with the anti-racism part of the course, at least you're seeing it so often that you know that you need to consider it. Because that's the biggest piece, not necessarily at the end of the day, are you going to be going out on the picket line and being an activist, but do you at least know that this is something that you need to care about in your clinical practice? And here's objectively why you need to see it. Like with nephrology, it's like you can look at the MDRD equation and say, okay, I'm just not going to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think that coming out of it, if I have to decide do I want that person to be an activist or do I want that person to not perpetuate racial disparities that affect black patients specifically in this way, I'll take that. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully the valence gets moved, like that Overton window piece eventually shifts over time.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Bring it.
So recently I learned that questions on racism and how that relates to healthcare disparities were added to the American Board of Pediatrics, the board questions. And this was done by Dr. Yusuf Tershani very recently, about just like a year ago, maybe less than a year ago. And the reason was he was trying to teach, racism and how there all these disparities are occurring in his classes, but was getting a lot of pushback. And well, this isn't going to be on the test. Like we need to teach students what's only on the exam. So he got tired of it. So he made sure that these questions were going to be on the board exams.
That's right.
So now it needs to be taught.
That's right.
Now no one can question why are we learning this, because unfortunately, I think that's one of the ways to make sure that everyone is learning this, putting it on the board exams, putting it on our, step exams everywhere, because I think that makes sure that everyone knows it's very important to learn this. This is going to be happening. We're going to be encountering these disparities in real time, in real life, all the time as physicians. And I think that was a good solution, at least. But I want to hear more, and adding it to our curriculum and making sure that we make these changes. I think the end goal is making sure it's on exams.
Yeah. I have to shout out pediatrics. I'm a med peds doc, woohoo! So because of that, I have to take 2 boards. And for the pediatric board, for your maintenance of certification, they give you points if you work in diversity or anti-racism projects. They give you points for that. And so PEDS is on it. PEDS is on it. I'm really proud of them, actually. So I'm going to share something, and then I don't want to point anybody out. I'm sure you guys can decide to chime in, whoever wants to chime in. But this work is heavy, right? This work is really heavy, and especially as a student of color, I'll just tell you, I was one of 10 in a class of 100. Like I said, I'm from Queens. I went to public school. I went to Hunter College, And so when I went up to medical school, I was like, wow, there's trees and like this campus. And it was like, mine was the subway, I'm a city girl. And, it was a totally different experience. And when you're coming from this kind of an experience, and I'm a first generation American, on top of that, I'm just trying to follow where I'm supposed to go, right? I'm trying to go where I'm supposed to go. And even though things are difficult, sometimes you have to suck things down because you're by yourself, right? You're by yourself. I'm actually the first graduate of my university that got into the combined MD PhD program in 2006. Can you imagine? In the 2000s, right? And so one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that you're sitting there as a student and you're like, all right, as a woman of color, as a black woman who also lost her father early because of racism and all of the stuff that's in medicine, I'm sitting there with my pen and my paper and I'm like, okay, we're dying of hypertension, okay. We're dying of that too, okay, all right, cool. Sickle cell, gosh darn it, all right. And you're just writing over and over, and you're like, by the end of the class, you're like, everybody's dying, everybody in my family gonna die, How do you actually cope with learning about racism, dealing with the microaggressions and the racism that's happening around you while you're trying to advance your own career, and give space to all of the things that are happening to you because you are learning and you are understanding more than your peers about the consequences of racism?
I feel like the first thing is finding a community. LMSA was very important to me as a first and second year medical student because we were remote and I was just like, what is happening? Who do I talk to? We had these little cafecitos and we had little chats over Zoom and they were very wholesome, and I got to just talk about what was going on. Someone was staying in the dorm at that time. They gave me a Zoom tour of the dorm before I got to move in, and I felt like there's so many hidden curriculum when you go to medical school, working with physicians. You don't know how you're supposed to act. You can't read the social cues if you don't have physicians as or parents who are physicians. Maybe you've never been exposed to that before. I think trying to reduce these barriers, providing students with mentors who are from similar communities to them, providing them with friends or upperclassmen who can help support them as they transition into medical school, providing financial support for students who might have trouble getting themselves through medical school, who don't have parents who can support them. I think there's a lot of things there that can help make learning this information less of a burden alongside medical school.
I'm trying to think if I even do properly deal with it. You know, it's something where I think you're exposed to those inequalities so regularly that a part of you does kind of turn off the little part of your brain that's like, oh, that's me, that's my family member, that's, you know, like you see and hear things in class that very much reflect your lived experience, and that's very difficult. And that's something where I started therapy at our institution last year. I started anti-anxiety medication as well last year, and that's done, I think, wonders for my mental health in dealing with the curricular, you know, dealing with the exposure, the frequent exposure, and then also seeing so many of those inequities play out in the news every day, in addition to working on projects that try to address those things, which is another way that I feel like I coped. First year, I mean, Christina, I started during COVID. You have COVID. You have remote education where you don't feel like you can really bond with any of your classmates, especially minority classmates who are kind of experiencing similar traumas. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. I started running after Ahmaud Arbery's death. And so that was something that has also been kind of this way where I feel like I can engage with what's happening in the world, but then also do something that allows my mental health to flourish, right? So it's kind of hard to balance the two, but I think learning how to throttle between the self-care and the work is the most important thing that we can be doing, and it's something that probably a lot of us do, even if we don't recognize it, because a lot of it is kind of tunnel vision. I want to make these changes because this affects me, this affects the people I love. But I do think that there's a part of you that needs to depersonalize it sometimes where, oh, even though I know that this is happening in my world, in the world that I came up in, I have to learn about it now so that I can try to fix it later. And that feels a little disappointing at times, where you kind of have to decide this is something that is not being backburnered, but it is being, I have to choose when to prioritize it, and that's going to be from a position of strength, not a position where I kind of have to sit and learn.
What do y'all wish that leadership of your institution knew to better address systemic racism? What would be the feedback if you could sit with your dean of medical school right now, right in front of you? Safe space. Safe space.
Well, I mean, Dr. Muller already knows this, but it's something where we want to see you in the room. We want you there. It's something where I think the problems are being discussed regularly amongst us students, amongst the faculty, amongst the residents, and we want to see you represented in those conversations. And I think what I was talking about before is distance, I think, is a big barrier to achieving a lot of anti-racism objectives. Is it's something where the further you are from the day-to-day boots on the ground, the people doing the work at your institution, the more difficult it is to make those changes, because we don't know who to talk to. I mean, we know org charts, we know hierarchies. We know on paper who we probably need to send an email to, but the actuality of who gets to make the decisions is something that tends to be different in reality than what's on paper, than what's on a website. And so I think seeing those people in the day-to-day, having a more direct path to them, makes a big difference.
I always think about it in terms of policy. I think this might be my health policy background always coming into play, but I would really like to see institutional policies change. And what I mean by that is I want to see accountability. There has to be a liability. If these kind of microaggressions occur and someone reports them, what actually happens? I usually don't see any follow-through. I mean, I've reported in my institution, and there's really been no follow-through. Another thing that I want in policy change is whistleblower protection. So if I speak up about something, I want to make sure that my career isn't impacted by that. These two things, I think, was when I was finishing up medical school and coming into this position, these are the two things I would really like to see. I think they will make all the difference. Policies do make a difference.
So I think something that I would like my institution to know is, well, when we're talking about systemic racism, a lot of times we think about it on this like overarching level, and we don't really look at the collective actions that build up to it. And also the people who can do it is a lot of time it's, oh, that's like the person you have lunch with like every Tuesday or something. So it's knowing that anyone can perpetuate this cycle, and it's because of the individual actions that build up to create that final dynamic. And in order to intervene with that, you have to be willing to not only step into your experience, but to step into the experience of the other people, whether they're students, whether they're patients, and to just take not only like the listening ear, but what my peers have said, the approach of what are we gonna do now? Am I willing to just say that I'm attuned to this, or am I willing to actually put my foot down and to take an action that says that this is something that is essential to me and to my institution as well?
I agree with the having leadership be in the room a lot more often and be more present in a lot of this maybe smaller conversations to really understand what we're trying to do more on the ground. I also think that switching from preclinical into clinical, I think I've seen a lot of work in the preclinical space and curricular sessions, things like that, but when we get to the clinical space, it's been really hard to find space outside of just the medical school, but in the hospitals themselves, to have some of these conversations, to confront some of the microaggressions that come up, how to navigate conversations you may witness as a medical student and feel helpless to be able to address them or cope with them. I think that's just been a struggle, in that we interface with so many different physicians, and I would like there to be more work collaboratively between the medical school and the hospital systems to ensure that those who are going to be professors working with students, things like that, we're all on the same page, because there's been a big disconnect that I've seen. And I think I would like to see maybe more collaboration then between our leaderships, between the medical school leadership, the hospital system leadership, and the student body as a whole. I also think I would like to see more diversity represented in our dean suite. It'd be really nice to see a mix of different faces in those really, really higher up positions. Everyone's nodding their heads. I think we all agree that there needs to be a cultural shift in terms of who is actually at the top of this leadership representing us, and that would be a really nice thing to see change.
Awesome. It sounds like you guys are working hard on trying to see what kind of influences you can make on curriculum changes, and there have been some curriculum changes in some of the institutions that you guys were representing. So what do you see when you see the effort being put forth for curriculum and programming improvements? Do you think it's sufficient? Do you feel like the students are actually taking it up? And what programs do you believe prompt the widespread buy-in from a student?
I think for me as a preclinical student, I was excited about some of the sessions that we had, but as a clinical student, as a third year, I did not very much receive the sessions that we had about anti-racism in our clinical, like our didactics, very well. I think that a lot of the times they felt forced, and a lot of times people didn't want to do them. For mine, 2 of them were canceled, and I was like, why are we learning about these medical things, but we're canceling these sessions that are so important, or they're having us post an optional paragraph about an experience of racism you saw in the hospital, but then you're never talking about it, you're never debriefing or figuring out how you can change the system. So I think that even though there are efforts to do it, I don't think that they're enough, and I think that there is more that can be done, especially for students who are working in the hospital.
Something that was actually recently started at our school was a journal club in our third year. So with every rotation, there's a journal club dedicated to anti-racism efforts. So we talk about an article that addresses racial disparities based on the rotation that you're on. And I found that to be extremely fruitful to engage in these conversations in the different spaces that we're rotating in. And they're very targeted articles based on the field that you're in. And I felt like it's not enough. It's 1 hour over 6 weeks where we're talking about this very specifically, but I found it to be at least a good start to bringing this up, that if we're going to have didactic sessions that is talking about, important facets of cardiology when you're on your medicine rotation, well, we need to talk about how racial disparities impact cardiology care and things like that. So I enjoyed that as a first step, and I think has gotten other students at school to pay attention, and now it's a normalized part of our third-year curriculum. But again, it's not enough. It's a 1-hour session, and I do think having seen other students develop curricular sessions and take the lead on that has demonstrated to other students that that's something they could do. So I think being able to see students in these leadership roles asking for more things has then instilled more excitement in earlier students in their medical education to then be able to do the same things. And so I think having some of those like maybe mentorship roles for students to see this as something they could do for themselves has been a really positive thing throughout my school.
Yeah, racism is uncomfortable, right? Talking about it is very uncomfortable, and that's a part of the reason why it works so well, is because the less you talk about it, the more likely it's going to continue. And what I've noticed in my preclinical coursework is that a lot of the students feel uncomfortable talking about it, mostly because they don't know the best ways to define it, they don't know the best ways to address it. And so it's hard to be the person that's kind of openly conjecturing, because everyone wants to look smart, right? Everyone first and second year, they want to look like they know what they're talking about. And with racism, you can't really do that, because we're not really taught that in any area of our education up to that point. But it's something that's incredibly crucial for this next phase of our careers. And a part of one of the projects that I work on in the RBI CAP Fellowship is helping design standardized patient cases that help students learn how to deal with racism that they experience from patients as a bystander, right? So how can students who might not experience the racism themselves help address racism from the perspective of someone who is there watching it occur against another member of the care team? And so obviously normalizing experiences like that would be best for everyone, because then you get the sense that, okay, even if I don't feel comfortable, even if I don't know what to do, I can learn what to do. And then from there, maybe next year you feel more comfortable intervening, maybe you feel more comfortable participating in discussions where you can say, even though I haven't experienced racism in my life, I now have an experience given to me from my institution that showed me what goes well when I do this, what doesn't go well if I try to take a different, like more stoic approach where I don't say anything but just feel like, wow, that was bad. You know, so I think it's something where students don't want to participate in the types of discussions that are happening, but the more we give them opportunities to engage, or I guess it feels like it's forcing those opportunities, but it's more just the exposure needs to be greater.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that's being said, and I wrote down a few things so I don't forget. We're seeing a lot of DEI funding cuts, across the country, which is just so terrible and unfortunate. So we have a lot of courses that are being canceled, especially in the undergraduate level. And one of the things that AMSA did was we sent out surveys to figure out, and we did like a med-ed scorecard to figure out what's being taught in medical education. Is this enough? What else would you like to learn for medical students? And one of the criteria, one of the answers that we received back was there isn't enough information or learning about racism in medicine. So we started a scholars program called Racism in Medicine, where people can join in, learn about this, about the healthcare disparities, what we can do, how we can advocate, how we can get bills passed, etc. But another thing that I think we know there's crucial gaps in medical education, especially in issues like this. But I really like the idea of standardized patients, making it so normalized that people can talk about it easily. And that's one thing that our institution started doing recently. And we also put out toolkits on what microaggression is, how to identify that, what should your response be, how could you deal with something like this. But the short answer is no, there isn't enough in the curriculum. We need to do more, and we have all these ideas. And I think institutions just need to talk to their medical students more and figure out what it is they want to learn and really find ways to incorporate that. So I'm not saying anything that's different, but if there's a way to put these on exam questions, I think people will take notice. That's an unfortunate thing, but yes.
Yeah, so something that I would like to see more of is just community integration. I feel like a lot of times it's kind of like, okay, here's the medical school, and then here are the patients and populations that you serve. And I would just like to see more interaction between the two, because a lot of times communities have a lot of great resources that are there that they might be doing their work separately, they might be doing their work with the community, but the medical school doesn't know about it. So I feel like being able to identify leaders who are in the communities and in the populations would be like a great first step. Something that some of the hospitals in Connecticut have are called family advisory councils or family advisory boards. Being able to have medical students maybe sit in on a meeting and be able to see what things are like from a patient's lens, I feel like would be a great first step. Inviting patients to come to the hospital and to have like one-on-one small group sessions with medical students and with physicians as well, I think would be helpful. But I feel like the integration just really needs to be stronger. It's not, oh, this is us versus them type of problem. This is everyone in one community trying to support one another.
I think we're coming up on time, but I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'll just poll the audience, make sure that nobody has a burning question that you want to ask our fabulous panel here. But the last question I have for you guys is, well, what resources do you and fellow students need to sustain the work that's being done toward anti-racism in medicine? And speak loudly.
I would say we need to be receiving the things that people who don't want to participate in this work, why do they not? You know, you kind of have to answer that question first. And I think there are a lot of incentives that come from not participating in this work. You get to do more things that are career-oriented, right? You get more publications, you get more funding resources because you're able to apply for things that are specific to the field that you want to go into. And so there's some aspect of compensation that's involved in that. Like for the fellowship that I do, I receive a stipend, right? And that's been incredibly beneficial because that's something where I don't have to worry about how I'm going to be able to afford to pay for certain groceries or rent or things like that. I mean, I still do, it's New York, but, but I worry about it less. And that's something that gives me a little bit more gas in the tank to participate in this type of work because my institution is helping alleviate a different burden that I have. And it's something that I think if this type of work, the people in charge of advancing these types of initiatives provide people certain incentives like publication opportunities, abilities to participate on boards that look great for our CVs, that help contribute to our ability to gain competitive residencies, that expose us to different movers and shakers across different institutions and different fields. That's something that I think would encourage people to want to participate in this work more and then incentivize us who already do to not lose steam. Because I think there's always going to be opportunities where we're jaded. There's always going to be opportunities where we're struggling to try to figure out, am I making a difference? But there are many different incentives, a lot of those being around the theme of compensation that I think can really help.
I think we need more time and money. I think there's a lot of times that we've wanted to do like small group sessions at our school to have more nuanced conversations, debrief sessions, and we just don't have enough faculty who are able to engage in those conversations. And so being able to hire more people who can show up in these spaces and educate us and talk to us and meet the students where we're at to have these nuanced conversations and be able to give us the space to debrief would be great. I think time obviously is always going to be limited, but being able to have more time in our curriculum to talk about these things, to develop out more sessions, to give more space to talking about anti-racism and where racism fits into medicine and how can we address it. Those are the biggest barriers that I commented on that we're running into, and I think being able to have, you know, the funding to bring in more people to develop out more sessions because everyone's already doing their job and now we're asking them to do more on top of it. So bringing in more people to give the dedicated space that that this conversation needs to have.
Yes, all of that. And I also think that starting people early is something that I wish, you know, I I had done personally, and I know that a lot of my friends who were in undergraduate with me and now they're in medical school, they wish they had learned about this stuff in undergraduate years. And how are we like integrating that into curriculum, especially for students who are pre-medical? They know they want to go to medical school already. How are we starting to give them this information earlier so that they can start the work and get excited about it even in their first year of medical school?
Yeah, so I also think being able to consider like what's going to happen when this person graduates is really important. So I think that framework needs to be in place before that person like goes on to the next level. Like we should be thinking about that from the first year, even when they're like stepping into the role. I know like a lot of times that like recruitment fairs is like how the clubs will get their members. So if we're able to advertise it to the incoming class starting at that time, so by the time they're moving on, there's already someone who's coming into that position who's already familiar with the framework and who's getting ready to take on that person's shoes and to be able to continue it. Because once that person goes to residency, I feel like it's a lot harder because they could be anywhere, who knows, in the country. So just being able to make sure to be thinking about that component as well.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add, honestly. Funding is a huge one. Where the money goes, that's where we can do the most work, have the most impact. Research opportunities, for sure, not just for our CV, but evidence-based medicine, we can use that to advocate. So that's really important. And really having diverse leadership. If there's no representation, then we're not having the conversations that we need to be having. So I think all of those factors together.
Are there any burning questions from the audience? I have time for one or two. Max 2.
Mine is more of a comment. I'm Julian. I work at the Health Department, Center for Health Equity and Community Wellness. I think one thing that I want all the panelists to hear, and even I guess in response to the question earlier, I think that when we look at these systems and we look at all the epi and we look at all the data, and we see that, yes, all these folks are dying, our people are dying from all of these things, that we really have to ground ourselves in the fact that it says more about these systems and the discipline than it says about us, these people. Because it's not for a lack of knowledge that these things are happening. Because we look at these other groups and we're able to capture these things, we're able to recognize these things and build in systems of care. So it's not that. So it says more about this system. I think and the fallacies of the system. I think the other thing is for us to really ground ourselves in what we are all a part of. You're entering an age-old movement to bend the arc of justice, even in medicine and healthcare. The lie is that they told us that naturally these things will move there. They told us all of that, and that's a lie. There were people moving it, bending that, working day in and day out for many years, and we have to see ourselves as part of that movement. It's our legacy and it's our inheritance. And that you are joining this and be secure in that. And ask this question, what does it mean to operate in this post-slave society, right? In this colonial society and practice medicine that is so degraded and impacted by white supremacy that we can't do what we say, that we can't actually practice or really fulfill that grand promise of the Hippocratic Oath. And that it is our duty as 21st century providers to really think about our analysis of race, of class, of gender, of all these things, and to refine our vision and the way that we see and understand these things to make it so clear and so great that you can do all of it so that you know when to apply race and when not to. So you know that when it's a distraction, but when it's a clarifying aspect to bring into the equation. So just really reshifting and saying that it's okay. You've joined a very janky, old, degraded system that we all need to work on improving, and that's what we're here for, to really think about how we can improve this thing and bring it into the 21st century, right, and leave all that dark age, white supremacy, dominance crap in the past, because it's dead. And we can't use it anymore. The world is too diverse. It is not just white. It is not just cis. And so just really remind yourselves and ground yourselves in that truth and never let anyone tell you any differently.
That's right. That's right, Monica. We have one more.
Thank you for that rallying cry. Amen. My question relates to, we are a fairly privileged group here in that we're, our institutions have taken on, many of you represent institutions that have taken on anti-racism as a driving, something that we should be doing. And my question is, how do we reach students who are in, institutions that don't have that, where they're not allowed to speak about these things, or where their faculty are not interested? And I see a number of, there's a number of organizations represented here who are reaching out to students broadly. And, we see Joel Burrell, reaching out to people on Twitter. It seems like, we need to reach those students who are in those other organizations or in those other schools so that they can speak from, they can be the grassroots there, and we can ignite this or continue this movement. Because if we're just talking within our own institutions and we have all the pressures coming down from the judicial and, other systems, that we're not going to be able to make the progress for enough people that we really need to make.
Go ahead. Go.
Hello.
So thank you for your question. So I can really resonate with a lot of the points that you made. A lot of times at my institution, I didn't feel like I could always connect. I felt like an outsider and an excluder, and someone who had all these ideas, and I didn't feel like my institution always wanted to hear it. So where I was really able to connect with people was on social media and online. I was able to meet a substantial amount of people through Twitter, medical Twitter. That's how I got connected with the Institute for Healing and Justice in Medicine, and that led me to a lot of different pathways of connection. And I was able to see, okay, I'm having these ideas, but I'm not the only one. There's people out there in the world who are also feeling the same things. We just need to find them. And I think the influence of social media is that it made the world a lot more connected, and I feel like there's pathways that you can really tap into that, and that students can really tap into that and say, hey, my name is XYZ, I'm interested in this component, and if anyone is interested, please reach out to me, or even reaching out to someone, I've seen your work, I'm really interested in getting connected, can we make this happen? So that's one avenue.
That's good. This will be the last comment. We have to move on.
I wanted to plug a program at our institution, the Art and Med Ed program, which I encourage everyone to look at. Dr. Leona Hess, who you should definitely talk to after this panel to hear more about it, where our school does participate in a lot of this type of outreach, where we're reaching out to medical institutions and their schools that want to be participating in anti-racist work and helping set up infrastructure at their institutions to introduce some of those changes within their curriculum, because it's something that definitely needs a lot. You need help to do this type of work, and you can't start from effectively nothing, and it's something we're having more structures where we are collaborating with institutions that you feel are doing a great job, or are just doing different aspects of work that you feel would be beneficial at your institution is incredibly important. So fostering those types of interdepartmental, extramural collaborations.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, in conclusion, it sounds like we need to address the time and space issue that everybody uses as an excuse to not put in the work of anti-racism in the medicine that we are learning. We need to mix up our spaces more and have more students and faculty and leadership together in curriculum spaces, career development spaces, in all of the spaces. We need to put it on the test, right? We need to teach medicine differently, teach anti-racism from the beginning, and not have it as a side piece like Journal Club just for one little thing, right? We need to make it more embedded into our curriculum. We need more community. We need more community engagement. We need more community for ourselves so that we can cope better. We need to have more systems of support for our students of color who are struggling with all of these issues of learning about the way that our country has been built and the way that medicine manifests in that. And we also just need to resource it, right? Give a hand to our panel. This was amazing.